Hi, in today's video we're going to talk about NuTone intercom wire. Specifically this. This is NuTone IW6R 6-conductor flat ribbon cable. This was originally introduced in 1986 with the then new model, the NuTone IM4006 system, and this was a revolutionary design. Prior to this, all NuTone 6-wire systems used cables that had 6 individual conductors in them, and this ribbon wire was designed to speed up installation, and it would make trimming out a system a lot faster than dealing with 6 individual connections on each station. Fortunately, the plan didn't go as well as NuTone wanted to, and this type of cable actually created a lot of different problems. So let's take a look at this cable. This is the original NuTone IW6R from around 1986, and you'll notice that it looks very similar to this cable. This is the original NuTone IW6R cable from 1986, and if we flip it around to the other end where I've opened it up, what you'll see is I've cut the cable into individual strands and stripped off the insulation off the ends of 2 of the strands, and what you'll see is you have a single solid conductor wire inside each strand. This was the heart of the problems with this type of cable. IW6R was revised around 1989 or 1990, and this is a sample of the revised cable. And what you'll see here is same type of cable. I've cut the ribbon into 2 individual strands on the blue edge, and now what we have in the revised cable, instead of a single solid conductor, we have a stranded wire inside. And the stranded wire solved most of the problems with this type of cable. Unfortunately, as it has happened in the past, this type of cable had already built a fairly bad reputation with dealers and installers, and there was a lot of pushback from them about eliminating this type of cable and going back to the standard IW6 cable, which has the 6 individual wires inside the cable. So why was this cable a problem? Well, this cable is not a problem, it's the original cable. The heart of this design actually revolved around these crimped-on connectors that were designed to be fastened onto the end of the cable quickly and easily. The idea was you would take the connector, you would orient the blue stripe with the blue marking on the connector where it's molded onto the top of it. You insert the connector or the wire into the cable, crimp it down with a pair of pliers, and you were done. If you did this properly, you could trim out a speaker location in probably 2 minutes, perhaps half as long as a speaker with individual wires. The problem with these type of connectors were it did require an installer to read the instructions, and that's always an obstacle with a lot of people. It was also very common to see these in the field where it would be inserted into the connector backwards, which caused a bend in the cable, and it didn't allow the connector to be fully closed when it was crimped. But the biggest problem with these were not the connectors. The biggest problem was the cable. So let's look at what's inside one of the... So here's a connector that I've disassembled. This is the top portion that fits in here, and the wire fits into the slot here. What you see inside the connector are 6 twin-pronged spikes, and the idea is that when you crimp the connector closed, the spikes are sharp and they'll cut through the insulation on the ribbon cable, and each individual conductor will be pushed down into the slot between the 2 prongs. This means that when you have a solid conductor in your ribbon cable, it's really a one-shot opportunity for it to make a good connection, and that was the heart of the problem. Also, since the cable has solid conductors, the cable is very stiff and it doesn't bend very easily, and when the wire would be manipulated to plug the connector onto the terminal on a speaker, you would have to bend the wire around, and you would lose the connection between the conductor in the wire and where it was bit into by the connections in the crimp-on connector. So this created a lot of problems. Since I'm a NuTone service center, we do warranty repairs for NuTone, and back in the day when the 4006 system was new, I probably did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of service calls, all under warranty, that involved completely just replacing all of the crimped-on connectors in a system so it would work properly. So it was not a good design. What NuTone realized is that they needed to do something about this, so they changed the IW6R to the version with the stranded wire inside of it. And since you have multiple conductors in a stranded cable, you have many opportunities for the sharp spikes to bite through the wires, and you have a lot of places where it can make a connection, which improves how well the connections are made. And also, since there's stranded wire in the cable is a lot more flexible, and that made it easier to manipulate when you plugged it into the back of the speaker or onto the terminal board. The reason that this is important today is the original 4006 system was introduced in 1986, so it's nearly 30 years old. And what we find is, after the last 30 years, the original IW6R ribbon wire, the insulation on the outside of the cable has become stiffer and harder and more inflexible than it was even when it was new. And when a speaker is taken off the wall, or when the master unit has to be worked on for some problem unrelated to the wire necessarily, we find that as the wire and connectors are unplugged from the speaker or unplugged from a terminal board and moved around and then plugged back in, it stresses the connection between the wire and the crimp-on connector, and it creates problems with individual speakers that didn't exist before you started troubleshooting for a different problem. So what's the best way to deal with this? If you have a problem with the original IW6R ribbon wire and the crimp-on connectors, you'll have to purchase new crimp-on connectors. These are designed to be a single-use item. If you're really careful and you're a little bit lucky, sometimes you can use them twice, but most of the time you have to replace them. Fortunately, NuTone still has these available, and we keep them in stock for service calls and customers who need them, so obtaining them is not really much of a problem. But the other thing you're going to need to go along with them is some of the later IW6R cable with stranded conductors. So why do you need this? Well, you need this because we're going to create a pigtail. And this is how you create a pigtail. First, you need some of the IW6R with the stranded conductors, and you need a new crimp connector. The proper way to insert this is you align the blue stripe with the mark on the connector that says blue. You insert the wire. Well, let's back up a minute. The first thing you need to do is you need a pair of scissors. And you need to cut the end of the cable with the scissors nice and square. If you're replacing the connector on the end of an existing cable, you should always cut the cable end off and put the connector on a clean end, so you have a better chance of making a proper connection. Then you slip the connector onto the end of the cable, and using a pair of pliers, you simply crimp the connector closed. It's really that simple. That's how long it takes. So now we're going to create a pigtail out of this. So what's a pigtail? A pigtail is basically a short piece of wire that's spliced onto another piece of wire, or a group of wires. In this case, it's one wire for one wire, or one IW6R cable onto the end of another IW6R cable. So here's how you create a pigtail. Take your short piece that you've purchased along with the connector. In this case, I'm going to cut it to about 8 inches. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use our scissors, and we're going to carefully cut between the conductors in the cable. So essentially what we're doing is creating individual wires. So now we have IW6R here, but here it's been split and we have 6 individual wires. Once you've cut the ribbon into strands, take your wire cutters and strip off about 1/2 inch of the insulation on the end of each strand. And now that's ready to go. Then you take your piece of original NuTone IW6R with the solid conductors, and we're going to do the same thing. I've already cut these two, so I'll make the 3 other cuts. And just like I did on the IW6R with the stranded wire, I'm going to strip off the ends. And here we have 6 individual wires on our solid conductor IW6R. So now we're going to make a pigtail out of it. So you'll see that on all NuTone IW6R wire, there's always one edge with a blue stripe. That's your indexing mark, so you can line it up properly. Sometimes on the earlier version, one side will have a red stripe also, but not always. It depends on when the wire was made. So we always use the blue stripe to start. So all we're going to do is we're going to do blue to blue, because that would be number 1. And we're going to twist the wires together. And we're going to use one of these little crimp-on connectors. In this industry, these are often referred to as bean connectors. They're made by a variety of different companies. There are versions of these connectors that are made for outdoor applications that have silicone sealant inside of them. Don't use those. All you have to do is slip it over the twisted end of the wire. Use your wire cutters or a pair of pliers and crimp it closed. And then we'll move on to do the next one. The only thing you have to make sure is that you keep them in the right order. If the blue wire is number 1, then the next wire will be number 2. Inside, these are made by a company called Dolphin. It's a good brand. Inside the connector, there's a metal sleeve with little teeth in it, and so when you slip it over the end of the bare wire and crimp it close, the teeth bite into the wire, and it makes a really good connection. So there's 2. Now I'm going to do the rest. So here's our finished splice. We now have created a pigtail. I put bean connectors on each of the splice connections. This becomes somewhat bulky. You can certainly bundle them together and wrap some electrical tape around them if you want to. That adds some strength to the connection so they don't accidentally get pulled apart. But these are very good connectors, and it's definitely the way to go. At one end, we have the solid conductor NuTone IW6R, and spliced onto it at the other end is the newer stranded conductor IW6R with its new crimp-on connector. So once you've made your pigtail up, you're ready to reconnect it either to the back of a remote speaker or perhaps to the terminal board behind the master station. If you turn the connector over, you'll see there's a row of 6 little holes, and they correspond with the 6 pins on the ribbon wire connector. And all you do is line this up and carefully snap it in place. Since the ribbon wire is more flexible than the solid wire, you won't have as much of a problem as the wire pushes the connector back and forth as you remount the speaker on the wall. And also, since you have stranded conductors in the cable, they won't wiggle out of the little areas where they've been bitten into by the spikes, and you won't lose connection, so your speaker should work properly. Here we're looking at the terminal board for an original NuTone IM4006 master station, and this is referred to as a ribbon wire terminal board because it has the ribbon wire receptacles on it. It's different than the later screw terminal board that they made. And I made this up as an example to show you how troubleshooting a system will create more problems sometimes than what you originally started with. So in this example, there are 4 cables for 4 remote speakers attached to the terminal board. There's behind the lower ones are the upper ones. So here we have a ribbon wire for speaker number 1. Here we have a ribbon wire for speaker number 2. But down here on the bottom row, we have ribbon wires for speakers number 6 and 7. And in a lot of installations where the wires all travel up through the top of the wall housing, the cables on the lower row will be folded over and cover up the cables on the upper row. So what happens when you have a problem in your bedroom happens to be speaker number 2. Well, to get to this cable and unplug it so you can check it and see what the problem is, you really have to unplug the cable from number 7. And if you have IW6R with solid conductor and the ribbon cable has become old and stiff, when you unplug it, and knowing that right now this location works correctly, when you unplug this to move it out of the way so you can get to this one, and you take this one off and you troubleshoot it and you realize where the problem is and you solve that problem, you plug this one back in. Then you go and you plug number 7 back in. And all of a sudden, the speaker in room that's connected to the number 7 connection has a problem. Why? Because you've disturbed the wire in the connector and now you have another problem. So then you have to troubleshoot that one. If you have several locations in your installation with problems and you unplug a lot of these, it's sort of a cascading problem effect, and that's difficult to deal with. One of the other situations that comes up when you're troubleshooting an IM4006 system is you may have a cable that you suspect has damage to it. You've lost the connection on one of the conductors somewhere in your house, but you need to check the continuity on the wires to see if there is a broken cable. The only way you can really do that with this type of ribbon wire with the crimp-on connectors is by unplugging it, using a pair of scissors and cutting the connector off, cutting the cable into strands, strip off the end so you can access the individual wires. You would do this probably at both ends, here and behind the speaker in whichever room this went to, so you can ring out or check continuity on the cables. And at that point, once you figure out what's wrong with it, and hopefully you've chose the right wire to troubleshoot and it doesn't end up being the one that may be over here, you'll need a new connector because they're usually single use. Sometimes you can get by with using them twice, but not always the case. So then you would have to cut the end of the wire off again to a square end, put on your new crimp connector. If you're going to do all of that and buy a connector, it's better to buy a short piece of the stranded ribbon wire, make a pigtail, plug it on, and be done with it. Otherwise, it's just an uphill battle. So, NuTone IW6R ribbon wire was a problem 30 years ago. It's a bigger problem today when systems are disturbed, so you have to be careful when you do your troubleshooting, or if you're adding speakers to your system, that you do it properly and don't create more problems for yourself. If you found this video to be helpful, please like it on our YouTube channel. If you think this video would be helpful to other people that have problems with their NuTone intercom systems, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribing to our YouTube channel raises our search rankings on YouTube, which simply means it makes our videos easier for other people to find. If you have ideas or suggestions about videos that deal with NuTone intercom systems and their problems, leave comments on this video and I'll look at them. I'm always looking for ideas. We're trying to make videos that are helpful to people and solve their problems. So please leave it in the comments. I will respond to the comments and see if we can make a video that will help you. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next video.